Welcome back to the deep dive. Usually when we turn these microphones on, we have a very specific energy. We are usually chasing a tech trend or we are unpacking a geopolitical crisis. And the pace is fast because the world is fast. We're usually just trying to keep up.
Right, it's often a sprint to the finish line of understanding.
Exactly. But today I want to set a different intention for you as you listen to this. The stack of research you've brought to the table today, articles on neurobiology, sociology, papers from the Netherlands and Peru, deep evolutionary psychology, it demands an entirely different pace. We aren't looking at the outside world today. We are looking at the machinery inside of us. We are looking at connection, attraction, and intimacy.
It is a heavy topic.
Yeah.
And I don't mean heavy as in sad. I mean heavy as in substantial. Gravity. It pulls on all of us. And the premise of this deep dive is that we often view our romantic lives, our desires, even our heartbreaks through a purely emotional or social lens. We tend to think of it as poetry.
Or we think of it as fate, stars aligning for two people.
Right, exactly. But what if we peel back the layers of poetry and fate? What is underneath all of that? What we find, according to the source material today, is biology. Raw, ancient, powerful biology. And the central thesis here is that we are operating with what the sources call a Flintstone brain in a digital world.
I want to just sit with that image for a second. The Flintstone brain. Because it sounds kind of funny, but the implications are actually quite serious.
It is the root of the mismatch. If you think about the human brain, not as a single, perfectly designed computer that was built in modern times, but think of it as an old house that has been added onto room by room over millions of years. The foundation, the basement that is ancient, that is the brainstem, the amygdala, the hypothalamus.
The survival centers.
Correct. These systems were designed for the Pleistocene era. They were designed for the savanna. In that world, survival was the only metric that mattered. Food was incredibly scarce, so we developed a brain that screams at us to eat sugar whenever we find it. Danger was physical, a predator in the grass, so we developed a fight-or-flight response that is instantaneous.
And reproduction, where does that fit into the basement?
Reproduction was the ultimate goal. In a harsh environment, if you saw a potential mate, hesitation was failure.
Yeah.
You needed a system that said go, pursue, connect, immediately.
So that is the basement of the house. But we do have a modern penthouse on top, right? We have logic. We have the prefrontal cortex.
We do, yes.
Right.
But the thesis of mismatch theory is that the environment has changed infinitely faster than our biological hardware could ever catch up. We were walking around with neural pathways designed for small tribes and immediate survival. We are navigating a world of dating apps, infinite choice, complex social contracts, and these digital super stimuli.
So when I am swiping on a phone, or say I'm in a crowded bar, my conscious mind knows perfectly well that I am in a safe, modern city. But my Flintstone brain, what is it actually seeing?
Your Flintstone brain sees a tribal gathering of infinite potential. It is overwhelmed. And because those ancient systems, the amygdala, the reward pathways, are designed for speed above all else, they often react before your modern logic even wakes up.
Let's get really specific with this, because the research you highlighted on wanting versus liking is profound. This comes from the OE et al. Study on the dopaminergic reward system.
This is critical. If you take one thing away from the biological side of this deep dive, it should be this distinction. In common language, we use want and totally interchangeably. If I want a piece of cake, it's because I like cake.
Right. It feels like the exact same emotion.
But neurobiologically, they are two completely distinct systems. Liking is the hedonic impact. It is the actual pleasure of the sensation. That is mediated largely by the opioid system in the brain. But wanting that is dopamine. And dopamine is not pleasure. Dopamine is drive. Dopamine is what they call incentive salience.
Incentive salience. That sounds a bit like corporate speak, but in the context of the brain, what does that actually mean?
It means a specific cue has been tagged as important. It demands attention. It demands pursuit. The OE study is fascinating because it showed just how fast this happens. They use subliminal processing to test it.
Subliminal. So this is happening totally below the threshold of conscious awareness.
Exactly. Imagine you are a participant in this study. You are looking at a screen. They are flashing images at you, but they're flashing them so incredibly fast, just milliseconds, that your conscious mind doesn't even register that you saw a picture. You just see a blur or a quick flash of light.
But the brain, the basement, sees it.
The brain sees it. When they flashed sexual stimuli images of attractive potential mates, the fMRI scans showed that the nucleus accumbens lit up immediately. This is the core of the reward system.
And the person sitting there has absolutely no idea it happened.
They have no conscious idea whatsoever. But their brain has already initiated the seeking protocol. The researchers actually call this a running start.
A running start. That is, well, it explains a lot, but it's also a little terrifying to think about.
It explains the pull, that magnetic feeling.
It implies that by the time I consciously notice someone across the room, or by the time I actively decide to swipe right on an app, my brain has already revved the engine.
The engine is revving, the car is in gear, and you are actively moving toward the object before your prefrontal cortex, your logic center, has even had time to ask, is this person a good match? Are they kind? Are they safe?
It's a literal chemical hijack.
It is. And in the Flintstone world, that hijack was a feature, not a bug. It ensured you didn't miss a rare reproductive opportunity. But in the modern world, it creates a constant state of low-level wanting. We are constantly stimulated by images, by apps, by advertisements everywhere we look. Our dopamine systems are just in overdrive, tagging things as important all day long.
And because dopamine is about the anticipation, not the actual satisfaction, we get stuck in the chase.
We get entirely stuck in the seeking. We become addicted to the pursuit, mistaken in the belief that the pursuit is the connection. But dopamine isn't connection. Dopamine is just the gas pedal.
So if dopamine is the gas pedal driving us blindly toward a person, what actually happens when we get there? Because the sources talk about a major chemical shift that has to happen for actual intimacy to occur, we have to talk about oxytocin.
Yes, the shift from seeking to bonding. This is where we move from the basement of the brain up to the living room, so to speak, although it's still very much driven by ancient chemistry.
Oxytocin is often called the cuddle hormone. I've always found that nickname a little, I don't know, diminishing. It sounds cute, but the research suggests it's doing some heavy structural work in our minds.
It is the literal chemical infrastructure of trust. Without oxytocin, mammals generally don't tolerate each other at all. We would just constantly compete for resources. Oxytocin quiets the fear response and allows us to be close to another creature. But there's a specific mechanism mentioned in the neurobiology papers called the suspension of judgment.
The suspension of judgment. This is the part that I think absolutely everyone listening can relate to, even if they've never heard the scientific term for it.
Absolutely. Functional imaging studies show that during the early phases of romantic bonding, when oxytocin and dopamine are both flooding your system, there is a measurable decrease in activity in the prefrontal cortex.
The logic center powers down.
The logic center powers down. And specifically, the parts of the brain responsible for critical assessment and negative judgment they go quiet.
So, effectively, love actually makes us blind.
Biologically speaking, yes. It creates a temporary physiological state of rose-colored glasses.
But why? I want to unpack that. Why would evolution design a system that makes us less smart, less critical, right at the exact moment when we are making a massive decision about a partner?
Because if we weren't blind, we wouldn't bond.
Say more about that. That's really interesting.
Intimacy is incredibly risky. Letting someone into your life, your space, your physical body, that is a massive vulnerability for a mammal. If your critical faculties were firing at 100%, if you were analyzing every flaw, every risk, every potential annoyance, the stranger danger alarm would never turn off. You would stay completely isolated.
So the brain essentially drugs the security guard so the partner can get in the front door.
That is a perfect analogy. It lowers the drawbridge, it quiets the amygdala, the fear center, and dampens the critical judgment. It is a biological necessity for pair bonding to occur.
This reframes so much of our personal history, I think. We often look back at failed relationships and say to ourselves, I was so stupid. The red flags were right there. How did I possibly miss them?
And the scientific answer is, you weren't stupid. You were simply human. Your biology was doing exactly what it evolved to do over millions of years. It was prioritizing connection over safety.
It really highlights why emotional maturity is so incredibly hard. We're fighting our own hardware.
We are. And we haven't even touched on the physical aspect of intimacy yet. The sources point out that physical connection isn't just a mechanical act. It triggers a cascade of over 100 different hormones and neurochemicals.
It's a chemical storm?
It really is. Testosterone, norepinephrine, serotonin. These alter your mood, they alter your mental state completely, they create deep attachment. This is why the modern idea of casual intimacy is often biologically very difficult for people to navigate. You might decide logically that an encounter is casual, but your body is indiscriminately releasing bonding agents.
You can't sign a contract with your liver to not process alcohol, and you can't sign a contract with your brain to not process oxytocin.
Exactly right. And there's one more layer to this biological onion that we need to address, which I find fascinating: the nose.
The olfactory system? This is the surprising fact territory for me in the source material. the major histocompatibility complex, or MHC?
It sounds like incredibly dense science, but it's actually the root of what everyday people call chemistry. We often say, I just have a spark with them, or we just click. We tend to think it's spiritual or energetic.
But it's actually immune systems.
It is very likely immune systems. The MHC is a set of genes that controls your body's immune response. We are constantly shedding these chemical signatures into the air around us, and the research shows that we are subconsciously drawn to people who smell different.
Different? I think I would have naturally assumed we want someone similar to us.
No, actually. We want someone with a dissimilar MHC. The evolutionary logic is brilliantly simple. It's about genetic diversity. If you mate with someone whose immune system fights different pathogens than yours does, your offspring will inherit a much wider repertoire of defenses. They will be vastly healthier.
So when I'm standing close to someone and I feel that magnetic pull, that spark, I'm basically responding to a biological resume check?
Your body's essentially saying, this person has the genetic puzzle pieces that you are currently missing.
That is incredibly unromantic and yet somehow deeply profound at the exact same time.
It connects us directly to the survival of the human species. But, and we have to keep coming back to this, but we don't live on the savannah anymore.
We don't. We live in a world where we use deodorant and perfumes, and most importantly, according to the sources, birth control.
Right. There is compelling research suggesting that hormonal contraceptives can actually alter this exact olfactory preference, potentially making women prefer MHC profiles that are similar to their own. It mimics the preference of a pregnant woman seeking family support rather than seeking a mate.
So we are actively scrambling our own biological signals.
We are operating with a Flintstone brain that is profoundly confused.
Yep.
We have the dopamine wanting system that is hyperactivated by dating apps. We have the oxytocin bonding system that deliberately blinds us to red flags. We have the olfactory system trying to sniff out genes in a world heavily masked by synthetic scents.
The hardware is completely outdated,
Yep.
or at least it's severely mismatched to the environment.
The hardware is mismatched. And if we just let the hardware run the show, we crash. We get hurt. We inadvertently hurt others.
So we desperately need a software update.
Precisely. We get cognitive override.
And that brings us beautifully to the second major pillar of this deep dive, education.
Education, the most vital tool we have.
But looking at the sources, especially the sociological comparisons between different countries, we aren't talking about sex ed in the traditional biological plumbing sense. Diagrams on a chalkboard. We are talking about something entirely else.
We are talking about preparedness. The source material is remarkably clear on this distinction. The transition from the Flintstone world to the digital age requires a specific literacy. It requires us to deeply understand the ancient machinery we just described so we can consciously navigate it.
And the most critical tool in that navigation, the core of the software update, so to speak, is consent.
It is. And I really want to slow down here because consent is a word that gets thrown around so much today. It's on college posters, it's in corporate HR manuals. It can feel very legalistic or bureaucratic to people. But if we look at it strictly through the lens of the brain, it is actually the direct antidote to the Flintstone hijack.
How so? Walk us through that connection.
Well, remember, the Flintstone brain operates on nonverbal cues. It operates on the thrill of the chase. It operates heavily on assumption. Consent, true, verbal, conscious consent, forces the prefrontal cortex to come back online. It forces a pause in the momentum. It forces you to check your internal reality against the other person's external reality.
The outline of our source material highlights a specific model for this that I want to unpack. The Fries model. F-R-I-E-S.
It's a wonderfully useful framework because it completely removes the ambiguity. And ambiguity is exactly where the biological danger lies.
Let's walk through it for you, the listener. F is for freely given. That means absolutely no coercion, no pressure, no manipulation. That's the baseline. But let's look at the others, starting with clear.
Clear. This is the one that people often struggle with because of the romantic script we've all been fed. We are taught by movies that talking ruins the mood. But clear means you aren't guessing. You aren't relying on subtle body language that can be easily misinterpreted by a dopamine-flooded brain. You are getting an affirmative, undeniable yes.
Then there is mutual.
Mutual changes the frame entirely. It stops intimacy from being a transaction, something I try to take from you or something you reluctantly give to me, and makes it a shared collaborative experience. If both people aren't visibly enthusiastic, it's not mutual, it's just using someone.
The next one is crucial, and I think it's the one the Flintstone brain probably hates the absolute most.
Ongoing.
Ongoing. This is the concept that consent is not a gate.
A gate. Explain that analogy.
We tend to think of consent like a checkpoint at a border. Okay, I asked for the date, they said yes. Gate open. Now I can do whatever I want. Or, we hooked up last week, so the gate is just open forever now.
But the Frye's model says...
It says there is no gate. There is only the continuous present moment. Just because the answer was yes 10 minutes ago doesn't mean it's yes right now. Just because it was a yes to kissing doesn't inherently mean it's a yes to anything else. Ongoing requires you to stay actively tuned in to your partner.
It requires you to keep checking the connection rather than just blindly following the drive, which perfectly regulates the dopamine. It stops you from viewing the other person simply as a goal to be conquered and forces you to view them as a complex human partner to be engaged with.
And finally, the S in fries, reversible.
You can change your mind at any point, even if you were the one who initiated it, even if you are already undressed, even if you are right in the middle of it. A yes can become a no instantly without penalty.
This builds profound authority over your own body.
It absolutely does. And surprisingly, it builds incredible safety for the partner too. Knowing definitively that you can stop at any moment actually makes you feel safe enough to start in the first place.
The sources mention that this type of explicit, nuanced consent is almost completely absent from the media we consume today. Specifically, they focus on pornography.
This brings in the porn literacy component of the education sources. We have an entire generation growing up with a supercomputer in their pocket, accessing unlimited, highly explicit material. And the scripts in mainstream porn are, well, they are Flintstone scripts on steroids.
There is absolutely no negotiation.
There is no awkwardness. There is no checking in, no asking, is this okay? There is just immediate high-octane performance. If a young person uses that digital content as their primary educational material, they are learning that consent is simply assumed. They are learning that aggression is synonymous with passion.
They are basically downloading a virus into their social software.
They're downloading a map that does not match the actual territory of healthy human interaction. And when they try to use that faulty map with a real vulnerable partner, people get deeply hurt.
So we have the biology of the ancient Flintstone brain. We have the solution, comprehensive education and conscious consent. It seems like a relatively simple equation, right? A plus B equals safety and better relationships. But when we look at the cultural reality, specifically the sources provided from India and Peru, we see massive systemic resistance to this.
We see the culture of silence.
Why is it so incredibly hard for society to talk about this?
Fear. It is a deep, primal fear in parents, in communities, and in societies at large. There's a pervasive belief that knowledge itself is dangerous.
The source calls it the myth of encouragement.
Exactly. The idea is, if I tell my teenager about contraception, I am explicitly giving them permission to have sex. If we talk about pleasure or boundaries in a classroom, we're somehow corrupting their innocence.
It's the idea that silence acts as a protective shield.
But the data across these sources unequivocally shows that silence is not a shield. Silence is a vacuum.
And what fills that vacuum when adults won't talk?
Misinformation. Peers who are just as confused. The internet. And of course, that dopamine-fueled Flintstone brain just running wild. If you don't give a young person the user manual for their own rapidly changing body, they're just going to push buttons randomly to see what happens.
Let's really look at the data here, because the comparison the sources make between the Netherlands and other regions is stark. It's night and day.
It is undeniable. The Netherlands has one of the most comprehensive sexuality education programs in the entire world. And it starts incredibly early, age 4.
Age 4. I can almost hear some of you listening pausing right now. That sounds, well, to an American ear, that sounds too young.
But we have to understand exactly what they're teaching at that age. At age 4, they aren't teaching the mechanics of reproduction. They're teaching something called spring kriebels, which translates to spring fever. They are teaching fundamental body autonomy.
Naming the parts.
Naming the parts correctly, yes.
Yeah.
Establishing firm boundaries. Teaching children to say, this is my body, you cannot touch me here unless I explicitly say yes. Teaching them that if an adult or a peer makes you feel uncomfortable, you tell a trusted teacher. They're building the absolute foundation of consent years before the reproductive hormones even kick in.
And the result of this early integration?
The result is that Dutch teenagers are not corrupted. They actually start having sex significantly later than teenagers in the US or the UK. And when they finally do, they're vastly safer about it.
The numbers in the source material are incredibly low.
We are talking about teen pregnancy rates of roughly 4 or 5 per 1,000. You compare that to the US, which is significantly higher, or countries with no formal education where it can be 10 times that rate.
So the data practically proves that education doesn't encourage promiscuity at all. It actually encourages responsibility.
It encourages critical thinking. When a young person truly understands their own biology, when they know, okay, I feel this intense pull toward this person because of a dopamine spike, but I logically know the risks, and I know I have a choice, they make vastly better decisions.
There was a specific study from Ambience, Peru, included in our research that I found really touching. It wasn't just about the cold numbers, it was about the shift in attitude.
Yes, that was a fascinating inclusion. This was a comprehensive program implemented in a much more conservative region. And the fear, again, was that talking about it would lead to moral chaos. But the post-study survey showed that 85% of students reported increased knowledge. But more importantly than the knowledge, 70% reported vastly more positive attitudes towards safety and contraception.
They actively wanted to be safe.
Kids don't want to ruin their lives. They don't want disease. They don't want unintended pregnancies. But they are so often blocked from the basic tools they need by a wall of cultural shame.
Shame really seems to be the heavy cloud hanging over all of this, doesn't it?
Shame is the enforcer of the silence. If you grow up believing that your sexual urges, which again are perfectly natural biological functions required for species survival, if you believe they are dirty or inherently wrong, you dissociate from them. You don't ask questions. You don't carry protection, because merely carrying protection implies you're planning to do the dirty thing.
Right. The old trope, nice girls don't plan, good boys don't ask.
Exactly. So when the Flintstone brain inevitably takes over in the heat of the moment, they are completely unprepared. They are defenseless. Education lifts that shame. It simply says, you are a mammal. This is exactly how your ancient machinery works. Now, let's talk practically about how to drive the car safely.
It normalizes the human experience.
It creates a safe space. And that safe, non-judgmental space is exactly where better choices are ultimately made.
I want to pivot back to the biology one last time before we close out this deep dive. We've talked extensively about the internal chemicals, the dopamine and oxytocin, and we've talked about the software update of consent. But there's one more fascinating detail in the sources regarding the external signals, the physical things we see.
The visual cues of attraction.
Specifically, the waist-to-hip ratio, the WHR. This is another one of those things where modern culture makes us think, oh, that's just fashion, that's just Instagram trends or the Kardashians. But the evolutionary psychology suggests it's so much older than that.
It goes all the way back to the savannah again. It's fundamentally about truth in advertising.
What exactly is the body advertising?
Health, and specifically reproductive potential. The research on WHR, specifically the widespread cross-cultural preference for a lower ratio, the classic hourglass figure, suggests that the ancient brain is actively decoding fat distribution.
So it's not just about looking good in a superficial sense. It's literally about what the fat is made of.
Precisely. Glutofemoral fat, which is the fat stored on the hips and thighs, is biochemically very different from visceral fat stored on the stomach. It is incredibly rich in long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids, specifically DHA.
And why does a Flintstone brain care so much about DHA?
Because DHA is the primary structural component of the human brain. It is literal brain food. The evolutionary theory is that this specific fat storage acts as a vital neurodevelopmental resource for future offspring during pregnancy and nursing.
So as crude as it might sound, a male ancestor who was intensely drawn to that specific body type was essentially securing a pantry of brain-building nutrients for his future children.
That is the raw evolutionary logic of it. He was subconsciously selecting for neurodevelopmental resources.
But the sources also show that this isn't a fixed universal law, right? It actually changes based on the environment.
This is where the nuance gets really interesting. In times of severe resource scarcity, like famine or extreme poverty, those visual preferences often shift dramatically. Men in those highly stressed contexts often prefer a much higher waist-to-hip ratio, a much fuller figure overall.
Because in a famine, you don't really care about DHA for brain building. You just care about surviving. You care about raw calories.
You care about survivability, yes. This shows that our attraction isn't just a rigid, unthinking program. It's highly adaptable. It constantly calibrates to the stress levels of the surrounding environment.
It just reinforces the overarching idea that we are constantly broadcasting signals and constantly receiving them. We're just walking biological antennas.
You really are. We're constantly reading the room, reading the pheromones, reading the physical ratios, and almost all of it is happening without us even knowing it consciously.
Which brings us all the way back to the beginning of our conversation today. We are these incredibly complex ancient machines walking around in a sleek, digital, modern world. We have the dopamine wanting system revving the engine. We have the oxytocin blinding system lowering our defenses. We have the nose subtly sniffing for immune systems and the eyes unconsciously scanning for fatty acids.
It's a lot of machinery to manage.
It is a lot. And if we just let that machinery run on autopilot, we are in real trouble.
That is the ultimate takeaway from all this research. Biology perfectly explains the drive. It explains why the feelings are so incredibly intense. It explains that running start, but it does not dictate the behavior.
That is the crucial distinction to make.
We are not slaves to our chemical receptors. We are not just Flintstones living in caves. We have that modern penthouse. We have the prefrontal cortex. We have the profound capacity for empathy, for foresight, and for conscious choice.
And education, real, honest, shame-free education, starting from a young age, is the bridge between the ancient basement and that modern penthouse.
It allows us to integrate the two, to be able to say, I feel this intense biological pull, and that's perfectly natural. But I'm going to act with respect. I'm going to clearly ask for consent. I'm going to ensure we are both safe.
It gives us the power to pause.
It gives us the power to be fully human.
We've covered a lot of ground today. We've gone from the microscopic neurons in the nucleus accumbens all the way to global statistics on teen health in the Netherlands and Peru. It's been a slow, deep look at what truly makes us tick.
And I really hope it helps listeners look at their own lives and their own relationships with a little more compassion.
Compassion for the Flintstone brain.
Exactly. Be kind to your ancient brain, but don't let it drive the car.
Before we sign off, we usually leave you with a final thought to ponder. And today, based on all these sources, I think it's important to land right on that intersection of knowledge and fear.
The cultural fear that knowing too much is dangerous.
We need to let that go. Take a moment to let this sink in. Education is not encouragement, it is preparation.
And if we understand ourselves, we make better choices.